When a 19-year-old was exiled to his late father's abandoned lake house, he thought it was a punishment. What he found in the attic would not just save him, but reveal the truth about the man he barely knew. If you've ever felt lost and searched for answers, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories for people who know what it's like to start over. The bus groaned like a dying animal, its brakes sighing as it pulled into the station. The station wasn't much of a station at all, just a concrete slab with a peeling blue bench under a corrugated metal awning. Beyond it, the town of Northwood huddled under a slate-gray sky that threatened a cold, persistent rain. I was the only one who got off. The bus doors hissed shut behind me, a final, pneumatic sound of severance, and it lumbered away, leaving me alone in a silence that was heavier than any noise. I was 19 years old. It was my birthday, and this was my inheritance, a one-way ticket to nowhere and a set of keys that felt like a block of ice in my pocket. 2 years. 2 years I'd spent in the state-run group home after Dad died. 2 years of counting down the days until my 18th birthday, only to find out that freedom just meant a different kind of cage. I'd spent the last year in a transitional housing unit, a cramped apartment shared with 3 other guys who were all running from something, their ghosts rattling around in the same cramped space as mine. Then, the day I turned 19, the letter had arrived. Not a birthday card, but a summons. From my stepmother, Angela, a woman I hadn't seen since the funeral, a brief, tense encounter where her grief seemed more like irritation. I shifted the strap of my duffel bag on my shoulder. It contained everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback, a toothbrush, and a phone with a cracked screen, and $17 left on its prepaid plan. The air smelled of wet asphalt and pine needles, a clean, sharp scent that was completely alien after years of city smog. I looked at the keys in my hand. One was a small, ornate brass key, its teeth worn smooth. The other was a modern, steel key, sharp and impersonal. They were the keys to my father's lake house. The house he'd retreated to after the divorce. The place I'd only visited once as a small child, a memory as faded and flimsy as an old photograph. The meeting with Angela and her lawyer had been short and brutally efficient. It took place in a glass-walled office 30 floors above the city, a place so clean and quiet it felt like you could hear your own blood moving. Angela wore a cream-colored suit and a look of practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. Her lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies with a face like folded parchment, did all the talking. As you know, Michael, he'd begun, his voice dry as dust. Your fathers will stipulated that upon your 19th birthday, the property at Black Lake would transfer to your name. Angela, as his widow, has graciously managed the estate's affairs until this point. Graciously. The word hung in the sterile air. Angela had sold the city house, the cars, everything of value. This forgotten property, this liability was all that was left for me. The property has been unattended for some time, Mr. Davies continued, pushing a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. There are significant back taxes owed, approximately 2 years' worth. The county will likely move to seize the property and auction it off within the next 90 days if those arrears are not settled. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. 90 days. Furthermore, he said, steepling his fingers, we've received an offer from a development firm, Lakeside Holdings. They're buying up a lot of the land in that area. Their offer is, frankly, below market value, but it would be enough to clear the tax debt and leave you with a small amount. A few thousand, perhaps. It would allow you to start fresh. Angela finally spoke, her voice smooth and cool. It's the sensible option, Michael. The house is a ruin. Your father, he let things go at the end. It's better to cut your losses. I just stared at the envelope. Inside, I knew, were the deed, the keys, and $500 in cash. A final clean break. Banishment packaged as an opportunity. I didn't want their money. I didn't want their advice. I wanted to ask why. Why she never called. Why no one had told me about the taxes, the decay, the fact that the one thing my father left me was being erased. But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, filled with all the things I hadn't been able to say for years. I'll take the keys, I'd said, my voice hoarse. A flicker of annoyance in Angela's eyes. This wasn't part of her neat and tidy plan. But she couldn't stop me. The house was legally mine. Mr. Davies slid the envelope toward me. I took it, stood up, and walked out of that glass tower without looking back. And now here I was, standing on a concrete slab in Northwood, with the threat of rain on the wind and 90 days ticking away like a bomb. A battered pickup truck that might have once been red, but was now a patchwork of rust and primer rattled to a stop in front of me. An old man with a face like a topographical map and a stained baseball cap leaned across the passenger seat. "You the one looking for a ride to Black Lake?" he grunted. I nodded. I called the only taxi service listed online for the town. This was it. "Hop in," he said. "Haven't been out that way in years. Not since old man Henderson passed." Him and my father. I threw my bag in the truck bed and climbed into the cab. The seat springs groaned in protest. The inside smelled of oil, stale coffee, and something vaguely agricultural. "Name's Gus," the driver said, pulling away from the curb with a lurch. "You his boy, then?" "Yeah, Michael." Gus nodded, chewing on a toothpick. "Figured." Got his eyes, he glanced at me, a quick, assessing look. "Place has been sit empty a long time. Nature's been taking it back. You plan on staying?" The question was simple, but the answer felt impossibly complex. "I don't know," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. "I guess I have to." We drove through the small town in less than 5 minutes. A main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a lot of shuttered storefronts. Then we were on a two-lane road, flanked by dense forests of pine and birch. The sky grew darker, and the first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the windshield. Gus switched on the wipers, which smeared the water across the glass in noisy, rhythmic arcs. "He was a quiet fella, your dad," Gus said, his eyes on the road. "Kept to himself. Came into town for supplies, paid in cash, didn't say much. Seemed like he was carrying something heavy." He flicked the toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other. "A lot of folks out here are. That's why they come." The pavement ended abruptly, turning into a gravel road that dove deeper into the woods. The truck bounced and shuddered, the tires crunching over loose stones. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches interlocking overhead, forming a dark tunnel. It felt like we were driving off the edge of the map. "Almost there," Gus announced after another 10 minutes of jarring travel. He turned onto an even narrower track, a dirt lane so overgrown that branches scraped and screeched along the sides of the truck. I could see glimpses of dark water through the trees. The lake. Finally, the lane opened into a small, weed-choked clearing. And there it was, the house. It was worse than I'd imagined. It wasn't a charming, rustic cabin. It was a wounded thing, a 2-story structure of dark, weathered wood, with a sagging porch roof and windows like vacant eyes. Paint peeled from the siding in long, curling strips. The yard was a riot of tangled weeds and knee-high grass. A massive oak tree stood beside it, one of its heavy limbs resting on the roof as if trying to push the whole structure back into the earth. It looked less abandoned than defeated. Gus pulled the truck to a stop and killed the engine. The sudden silence was broken only by the drumming of rain on the metal roof and the screech of the wipers as they came to a halt. "This is it," he said, his voice softer now. "End of the line." I just stared at the house, a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't a home. It was a tombstone. "Listen, kid," Gus said, turning to face me. "There's a motel back in town. The Sleepy Pine. It's cheap. If you need a place to go." It was a kind offer. A life raft. For a second, I considered it. I could take the $500 from Angela, stay at the motel for a week, and figure out a way to get back to the city, back to the anonymous misery I knew. But then what? Another group home? Another shared room? I was tired of running. Tired of being a piece on someone else's board. "I'll be okay," I said, trying to make my voice sound more confident than I felt. "Thanks for the ride." I paid him from the cash Angela had given me, grabbing my duffel from the back. He didn't drive away immediately. He waited, watching as I walked up the 3 rotten steps to the porch, which groaned ominously under my weight. I fumbled with the keys, my hands clumsy with cold and nerves. The modern steel key fit the deadbolt. It was stiff, rusted, I had to put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight until, with a sharp, ugly crack, the lock gave way. The door swung inward on a single, protesting hinge, opening into a wall of darkness that smelled of dust, damp, and decay. I stood there on the threshold, staring into the gloom. Behind me, I heard the sound of Gus's truck engine starting up. He was leaving me here. I was truly, completely on my own. The darkness inside the house was thick and absolute. I fumbled along the wall for a light switch, my fingers brushing against peeling wallpaper and something that felt unnervingly like cobwebs. I found a switch, flicked it. Nothing. The power was off. Of course it was. I pulled out my phone, its cracked screen providing a weak, ghostly light. The beam cut a narrow path through the gloom, revealing a living room frozen in time. Furniture, a sofa, a couple of armchairs, a coffee table, was draped in white sheets, their forms rising like pale ghosts from the floor. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, disturbed only by the tracks of mice. The air was frigid, colder than it was outside, and carried the musty, cloying scent of a place that had been sealed for a very long time. My breath plumed in the weak light. I stepped inside, my boots echoing on the wooden floorboards. The door swung shut behind me, with a final, booming thud that seemed to shake the whole house. I was sealed in. I walked slowly through the room, my phone's light dancing over the shrouded furniture. On the far wall was a massive stone fireplace, its hearth filled with old, gray ash. Above it, on a mantelpiece, the dust was thinner in one rectangular spot. A picture had been there. It was gone now. Next to that empty space, however, sat a single object. A long, thick business envelope, yellowed with age. My name, Michael, was written on the front in a strong, slightly slanted handwriting I recognized instantly. My father's. My heart gave a painful lurch. It felt like he'd left it there yesterday. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and picked it up. The paper was dry and brittle. It wasn't sealed. I moved to one of the windows and pulled back the edge of a heavy, moth-eaten curtain. Gray afternoon light filtered in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat on the edge of a sheet-covered armchair, the fabric crinkling under my weight, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper and the small, ornate brass key from the keychain. I unfolded the letter. The same familiar handwriting filled the page. Michael, it began. If you're reading this, then it means I'm gone, and the world has done what I was afraid it would do. It has sent you here. I am sorry. I am sorry for so many things, but most of all, I am sorry for leaving you to face this alone. I need you to listen to me now, not as the father you barely remember, but as a man trying to fix his biggest mistake. This house is not a punishment. It is a key. Do not trust Angela. Do not trust any offer she makes. She does not understand what is at stake. There are debts attached to this property, but they are not the kind that can be paid with a simple check. I was involved with some very dangerous people. A business deal that went wrong a long time ago. They thought I had something of theirs, something I was supposed to be holding. I let them believe it. It was the only way to keep them away from you. This house, this land, it was my fortress. As long as I was here, a ghost in my own life, they knew they couldn't get to you. They will have told you the house is worthless. They will tell you to sell. That is what they want. Lakeside Holdings, the developers, they aren't just developers. They're front. They want this land, and they want to tear this house down to make sure nothing is ever found. You cannot let them do that. I have left you a way out, a way to make this right. Everything you need is here in this house. But you have to be smart, and you have to be strong. In the attic, there's an old steamer trunk against the north wall, under the round window. Inside that trunk is another box. This small brass key will open it. What's inside will give you the start you need. But it is only a start. The real solution, the final answer, is also in that attic. It's not in a box. It's part of the house itself. Look for the place where the shadows are wrong. Look for the work that is newer than the rest. I built you a vault, son. Not of steel, but of wood and nails and secrets. Find it. Be careful. They may be watching. Don't talk about this to anyone. Not yet. Settle the taxes first. That's the first step. Show them you belong here. This is your home now, Michael. I know it doesn't look like much, but I promise you, I did all of this to give you a chance. A real one. Don't let me down. Dad. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. My mind was reeling. Dangerous people. A front. A vault. It sounded like something out of a movie, not my life. My father, the quiet, sad man I remembered from my early childhood, a man who fixed things and smelled of sawdust, was caught up in something criminal. It didn't make sense. And yet, the letter felt real. The warning in his words was chillingly clear. The cold in the house seemed to deepen, seeping into my bones. I looked around the room, at the shrouded furniture and the deep shadows in the corners. The house no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Was it just paranoia triggered by my father's letter? Or was there someone out there in the dense, dark woods surrounding the lake, waiting to see what I would do? The weight of his words settled on me. Settle the taxes. 90 days. The clock was ticking louder now. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, so profound it was dizzying. I was cold, hungry, and emotionally shattered. The elaborate mystery my father had laid out felt like a cruel joke. A vault? Hidden money? It was too much. All I could see was the decay, the peeling paint, the rot. I stood up and walked through the downstairs rooms, my phone's weak beam my only guide. The kitchen was a disaster. Cabinet doors hung open, and a fine layer of grime covered the counters. In the sink was a single coffee mug, a dark ring of residue at the bottom. The last cup of coffee my father ever had. The thought hit me with an unexpected force, a fresh wave of grief that was sharp and physical. He had lived here alone for years. He had died here alone. I found a small bathroom under the stairs, the toilet bowl stained brown. The water was off, too. Of course it was. Everything was off. Everything was broken. I went back to the living room and sank onto the dusty couch, not bothering to remove the sheet. I pulled the thin blanket from my duffel bag and wrapped it around myself, but it did little to ward off the damp chill. I was trapped. Angela and her lawyer had wanted me to sell. The people my father feared wanted me to sell. It was the easy path. Take the few $1,000s and disappear. Start over somewhere new, somewhere warm. Forget this place. Forget this letter. Forget the ghost of a man who had left me a puzzle I had no idea how to solve. The thought was seductive. It promised relief. I could call Mr. Davies in the morning. Tell him I'd changed my mind. Sign the papers. By this time tomorrow, I could be on a bus heading south, leaving the cold and the rot and the secrets behind me. For a few minutes, I let myself believe in that fantasy. A clean slate. No debts, no dangerous people, no crumbling house full of ghosts. But my father's words echoed in my head. This house is not a punishment. It is a key, and don't let me down. He had chosen this isolation to protect me. He had spent his last years in this cold, lonely place, holding off shadows I never knew existed. Selling the house wouldn't just be giving up a piece of property. It would be invalidating his sacrifice. It would be letting them win, whoever they were. Anger began to burn through the cold and the fear. A slow, steady heat. Anger at Angela for her cold dismissal, at the faceless developers for trying to steal my inheritance, and at my father for leaving me in this mess. But also a fierce, protective anger on his behalf. They had driven him into exile, and now they were coming for the last thing he had. The sun was setting, the gray light outside the grimy windows fading to a deep, bruised purple. The house descended into an even deeper blackness. My phone battery was at 20%. I had no power, no water, no heat. Just a ghost story in a letter and a brass key that promised. What? A start. Okay, Dad, I thought, clutching the letter in my hand. Okay, a start. I'll start in the morning. The attic. Tonight, I just had to survive the cold and the dark. I curled up on the couch, pulling my knees to my chest, and closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the rain and the groans of the old house settling around me. It sounded like it was sighing, or maybe it was just me. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the floorboards, every skittering sound in the walls made my heart pound. I felt like a trespasser in my own home, a stranger in my own life. But somewhere in that long, cold night, the fear began to curdle into something else. Something hard and sharp. Resolve. Morning came not with a sunrise, but with a slow, reluctant lightening of the sky. The rain had stopped, but the world outside was shrouded in a thick, white mist that clung to the trees and swirled over the dark surface of the lake. I woke up stiff and freezing, my jaw aching from clenching it all night. The first order of business was survival. I needed water, food, and light. I rummaged through the kitchen cabinets with my phone's dying light. I found a half-empty box of matches, a few dusty cans of beans, and a can opener. In a junk drawer, I found 3 stubby candles. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I took one of the cans and the opener outside. The air was cold and clean. The mist was so dense I could barely see the edge of the woods. The lake was invisible, but I could hear it, a gentle lapping sound against the shore. I managed to pry the can open and ate the cold beans directly from the tin, the metallic taste sharp on my tongue. It was the best meal I'd ever had. With a little fuel in my system, I turned my attention to the attic. The access panel was in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway. It was a simple square of plywood with a string hanging from it. The upstairs was just as dusty and neglected as the downstairs. 2 bedrooms, both with sheet-covered beds. One was clearly my father's. A stack of books on the nightstand, a pair of worn work boots on the floor. I didn't let myself linger. The grief was still too raw, a wound that I couldn't afford to probe right now. I had a mission. I pulled the string. The panel opened with a shower of dust and dead insects, and a rickety, folding ladder clattered down. It looked ancient and unstable. I tested it with my weight. It groaned but held. Taking a deep breath and one of the candles, I started to climb. The attic was exactly what you'd expect. A low-ceilinged space smelling of old wood, insulation, and time itself. The air was thick and still. A single, round window at the far end, the north wall my father had mentioned, was caked with so much grime it let in only a faint, milky light. The floor was cluttered with cardboard boxes, broken furniture, and discarded junk. My small candle flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that made the piles of forgotten belongings look like sleeping monsters. I made my way toward the round window, stepping carefully over loose floorboards. And there it was, just as he'd said, an old, black steamer trunk, bound with leather straps and brass fittings, sitting against the north wall. It was enormous, big enough to hold a person. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was the first step, the first real piece of the puzzle. The leather straps were dry and cracked, but the latches weren't locked. I lifted the heavy lid. The hinges shrieked in protest. Inside, it was filled with old clothes, reeking of mothballs and stacks of yellowed newspapers. I dug through them, my hands getting covered in dust. At the very bottom, my fingers hit something hard and wooden. I pulled it out. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box about the size of a shoebox. It had a small brass lock on the front. My hand was shaking again as I took out the small brass key from my pocket. It slid into the lock perfectly. With a soft click, the lock opened. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of it. $100 bills, bundled together with rubber bands. I pulled them out, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. I counted them. There were 10 bundles. $10,000 in each. $100,000. I stared at the cash, a fortune to someone who'd been living on $17. It was enough to pay the taxes 10 times over. It was enough to fix the roof, turn on the power, buy a car. It was enough to live on for years. It was a lifeline. Beneath the money was a thick, leather-bound ledger and another envelope, this one sealed with wax. I opened the ledger first. The pages were filled with my father's neat, precise handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was a record. Dates, names, amounts. It detailed years of payments, small at first, then larger, all made to a single entity, Alate Lakeside Holdings. It wasn't a business deal. It was blackmail, extortion. For years, they had been bleeding him dry. The last entry was dated 2 days before he died. Then I opened the sealed envelope. Inside were several documents. A copy of a police report from 15 years ago, detailing a warehouse fire that had been ruled an accident. A sworn affidavit, signed by my father, stating that his business partner at the time, a man named Marcus Thorne, had set the fire intentionally for the insurance money. My father had been the only witness. There was also a newspaper clipping, an obituary from Marcus Thorne, who had died in a car accident a year after the fire. And finally, there was one last letter. Michael, it read, if you found the money in this ledger, you have what you need to survive. But if you're to truly be free, you need to understand the truth. Marcus didn't die in that accident. He faked his death. He was the one who started Lakeside Holdings, using the insurance money from the fire. He was my partner and my friend, and he betrayed me. When he found out I had a copy of this affidavit, he started the blackmail. He couldn't risk me going to the police and exposing him. It wasn't just about the money. It was about my silence. I paid him for years. I paid him to stay away from us, from you and your mother. It's why she left. She couldn't live with the fear, with the secrets. I don't blame her. After the divorce, I moved out here to be as far away from him as possible. But he found me. The payments continued. He bled me dry until there was nothing left but this house. And then he wanted that, too. He knew I would never let him have it. Because this is where I kept the evidence. The real evidence. The money I've left you should be clean. It's cash I saved over years, bit by bit, from side jobs, fixing boats for people around the lake. It's honest money. Use it to pay the taxes and make this place livable. But it won't stop them. Thorne's son runs the company now, and he's just as ruthless as his father. They will keep coming for this land. They need to destroy this house to destroy the proof. That's where the vault comes in. What I hid in the vault isn't money. It's the original affidavit, my recorded testimony on tape cassettes, and the financial records that prove Marcus Thorne survived and laundered the insurance money through a series of shell corporations that eventually became Lakeside Holdings. It's everything the police would need to open the case. It's the truth. Finding it is your choice. You can take the money from this box and run. Disappear. Start a new life. No one would blame you. Or you can stay, find a vault, and fight. You can clear my name and bring them down. But if you choose to fight, you will be making a powerful enemy. They will not give up easily. The choice is yours, son. Freedom or justice. I couldn't have both. Maybe you can. Look for the new wood among the old. I wasn't just letting this place fall apart. I was rebuilding part of it. That's your clue. Whatever you decide, know that I never stopped loving you. I never stopped thinking of you. Everything I did for you. I sat there in the dusty, cold attic, the letter in my hands, the stacks of cash beside me. $100,000. A ticket to anywhere. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. I could walk away. I could leave the ghosts and the blackmail and the danger behind. I could be safe. But safety felt like a lie. Thorne and his company had destroyed my father's life. They had taken my family, my home, my childhood. They had reduced a good man to a recluse, living in fear and poverty. And now they were trying to erase the last trace of him from the world. My father had given me a choice, freedom or justice. But looking at his handwriting, feeling the weight of the years of his struggle in that ledger, I realized they were the same thing. I would never be free if I ran. Their shadow would follow me, the unspoken truth of my father's life, a heavy cloak I would wear forever. Justice was the only real freedom. I looked around the attic, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. New wood among the old, he'd written. The attic was a maze of old, dark beams, rafters, and floorboards. I started to search, running my hands along the wood, feeling its texture. Most of it was rough, splintered, covered in a century of dust. I moved methodically from one end of the attic to the other. My candle was burning low, the flame sputtering. I had to hurry. I was near the chimney, a massive brick structure that rose through the center of the house when I saw it. The floorboards around the base of the chimney were different. The wood was a slightly lighter color. The nails were newer, shinier, and there were no cobwebs in the seams. I knelt down, my heart hammering in my chest. I ran my fingers along the edge of one of the boards. It felt loose. I pressed down. Nothing. I tried to pry it up with my fingers, but it wouldn't budge. I needed a tool. I scrambled back down the ladder, my mind racing. In the kitchen junk drawer, I remembered seeing a rusty screwdriver. I found it and a small hammer. My hands were slick with a mixture of sweat and dust as I climbed back into the attic. My candle had burned down to a nub, its light faltering. I wedged the screwdriver into the seam of the board and tapped it with a hammer. The wood groaned. I pried harder. With a splintering crack, the board lifted. Beneath, it was not insulation or darkness, but the top of a metal box. It was a heavy-duty, fireproof safe, the kind used for documents. It had been sunk between the floor joists, and the new floorboards were a cleverly disguised lid. This was the vault. It had a combination lock. My hope faltered. I had no combination. I sat back on my heels, staring at it in frustration. A vault I couldn't open was just as useless as no vault at all. I thought back to his letter. He had been so meticulous, so careful. He wouldn't have left it to chance. The combination had to be somewhere. A date. Something significant. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I thought about the dates in the ledger, the date of the fire. Nothing worked. My candle finally gave out, plunging the attic into near-total darkness, relieved only by the faint, gray light from the filthy, round window. I was defeated. I sat there in the dark, the cold seeping back into my bones. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe he was supposed to just take the money and go. But the anger, the resolve was still there. I wouldn't give up. I crawled over to the window, my knees scraping on the rough floorboards. I tried to clean it with the sleeve of my jacket. The grime was thick, almost like paint. But as I rubbed, a little more light came through. And I saw something, scratched into the dusty glass, almost invisible. A series of numbers. 6 of them. So faint, you could only see them if the light hit them just right. A birthday. August 14th, 68. Not mine. Not his. I pulled out my phone, the battery now at a critical 5%, and did a quick search for the name from the police report. Marcus Thorne. His date of birth. My father, in a final, grimly ironic twist, had used his enemy's birthday as the key to his destruction. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely work the dial on the lock. I entered the numbers, my breath held tight in my chest. 8 right. 14 left. 68 right. I pulled a handle. There was a heavy, satisfying clank, and the door to the safe swung open. Inside, there was no money. Just a stack of tape cassettes, a bundle of papers held together with a thick rubber band, and a small, framed photograph. I picked up the photograph first. It was of me, a small boy of 4 or 5, sitting on my father's shoulders. We were by the lake, the sun shining. He was laughing a wide, genuine, happy laugh that I had completely forgotten. A wave of grief and love so powerful it stole my breath washed over me. This was the man they had taken. I gathered the tapes and the documents. This was it, the truth, the weapon he had forged for me. I made my way out of the attic, down the ladder, and back into the cold, gray light of the house. I sat on the floor of the living room, the evidence spread out around me. I had the money to survive. I had the proof to fight. My father had given me everything I needed. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like an armory. Listen, if you've ever been at a point where giving up felt like the only option, I want you to know you're not alone. This community is for you. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to find strength you didn't know you had. Sometimes the darkest places hold the keys to our own freedom. The next few days were a blur of activity. My first priority was to get the house functional. I took $1,000 from a box and walked the 5 miles into town. The walk felt different this time. I wasn't an exile arriving in disgrace. I was a man with a purpose. The air felt cleaner. The trees stood taller. In town, I bought a generator, a space heater, work lights, groceries, a new SIM card for my phone, and a heavy-duty padlock for the front door. I paid for everything in cash. Gus, the taxi driver, saw me loading things into a cab and came over, a curious look on his face. "Settin' up shop, are ya?" he asked, chewing on his ever-present toothpick. "Something like that," I said. Decided to stay. He nodded slowly, a small smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Good. This place needs some young blood. Your dad would have liked that." Back at the house, I fired up the generator. The sound of its engine shattered the oppressive silence, and when I plugged in the work lights, The dusty rooms were flooded with brilliant, harsh light. The ghosts receded. It was just a house now. A house that needed a lot of work. What was my house? The next day, I went to the county tax office. I walked up to the counter, put down $10,000 in cash, and said, "I'm here to pay the back taxes on the Henderson property at Black Lake." The clerk, a woman with tired eyes, looked at me. Then at the cash, her eyebrows raised in surprise. She processed the payment, stamped my receipt, and handed it to me. "You're all paid up, son," she said. "Property's clear." Walking out of that office, I felt 10 feet tall. I had cut the first string. Lakeside Holdings had lost their easiest path to my home. The next step was more complicated. I had the evidence, but I was just a 19-year-old kid. Who would listen to me? I needed an ally. I thought of Mr. Davies, Angela's lawyer. My father's letter had warned me not to trust anyone, but Davies was a man of the law. He had been cold and professional, but not malicious. He was a long shot, but he was the only shot I had. I called his office. His secretary tried to put me off, but I was persistent. "Tell him it's Michael Henderson," I said. "It's about Lakeside Holdings, and it's urgent." He called me back within the hour. His voice was clipped and patient. "Michael, I trust you've reconsidered the offer. It's the smart play." "I'm not selling," I said, my voice steady. "I'm calling because I have information about the real owners of Lakeside Holdings, about a man named Marcus Thorne, and about a fire 15 years ago." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed completely. All the impatience was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "Where are you?" he asked. "At the house." "Don't go anywhere," he said. "Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there tomorrow morning." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in the house, the generator humming outside, and listened to my father's testimony on an old cassette player I'd found. Hearing his voice, calm and clear, detailing the crime, the threats, the years of fear, it was heartbreaking. But it was also empowering. He wasn't just a victim. He was a witness, and he had passed that responsibility to me. Mr. Davies arrived exactly when he said he would, driving a sleek black sedan that looked completely out of place on the overgrown dirt lane. He got out of the car, looking at the dilapidated house with a new expression on his face. Not pity, but calculation. I led him inside, to the living room where I had the ledger, the documents, and the tapes laid out on the coffee table. He didn't speak for over an hour. He read every page of the ledger. He examined the affidavit, the police report, the obituary. He read my father's final letter. Then he looked at me, his eyes sharp. "This is explosive," he said, his voice quiet. "If this is authentic, Lakeside Holdings is more than a development company. It's a criminal enterprise built on a foundation of fraud and extortion." He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "Your father was a very brave man, and a very careful 1 inch. Can we use it?" I asked. "Can we stop them?" He leaned back, a grim smile on his face. "Oh, I think we could do more than that. The current CEO, Marcus Thorne Jr., has built a massive corporate empire. He has a lot to lose. An accusation like this, backed by this kind of evidence, it would ruin him." He tapped the affidavit. "This changes everything." Angela had no idea. She just knew your father was secretive and in some kind of financial trouble. She thought he was paranoid. "So you'll help me?" "Help you?" Mr. Davies let out a short, dry laugh. "Mr. Henderson, a case like this comes along once in a career. I'm not just going to help you. I'm going to represent you. Pro bono. We're going to take them to the cleaners." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Mr. Davies handled the legal side, filing motions, contacting the district attorney's office, and preparing a massive civil suit. My role was simpler. I stayed at the house. I worked. I used the money my father had left me to begin the slow process of bringing the place back to life. I hired Gus to help me. We cleared the overgrown yard, patched the leaky roof, and replaced the rotten porch steps. I had the power and water turned back on. I scrubbed floors, washed windows, and aired out the musty rooms. With every small repair, I felt like I was healing a piece of myself. The house was breathing again, and so was I. I started exploring the woods around the lake, finding the trails my father must have walked. I found an old fishing rod in the shed and spent hours on the small, rickety dock, casting a line into the dark water, feeling the peace of the place settle over me. This land wasn't just a legal asset, it was a sanctuary. My father had chosen it for its isolation, its ability to hide him. But in doing so, he had preserved a piece of wild, quiet beauty. The news about Lakeside Holdings broke a month later. It was a statewide scandal. The district attorney unsealed an indictment against Marcus Thorne Jr. for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. The old arson case was reopened. Faced with the mountain of evidence my father had so carefully preserved, Thorne Jr.'s corporate empire crumbled. He and his associates were arrested. The civil suit Mr. Davies filed on my behalf was settled out of court for a sum that was, in his words, life-altering. But the money wasn't the victory. The victory was standing on the porch of the house, which now had a solid roof and a fresh coat of dark green paint, and reading the headline in the paper, "Local man's secret legacy exposes decades of corruption," my father's name was cleared. He wasn't a paranoid recluse who had abandoned his family. He was a hero who had sacrificed everything to protect his son and see that justice was done. I cried then, not for the years I had lost, but for the father I had finally found. I cried for his loneliness, for his quiet courage. I cried because I finally understood that he had never really left me. His love was in the solid foundation of the house, in the quiet strength of the old oak tree, in the vault he had built not of steel, but of a father's fierce, unwavering protection. The house on Black Lake is my home now. It's quiet, and the winters are long, but it's real. It's a legacy. Sometimes I sit on the dock and look out over the water, and I feel him there with me. The choice he gave me, freedom or justice, was never a choice at all. By fighting for justice for him, I had found my own freedom. Freedom from the past, freedom from fear, and the freedom to build a future on the foundation he had left for me. My father left me more than a house. He left me a second chance. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in fighting for your own second chance, subscribe and join our community. Share your story below. I read every one, because every story of
Pretty good, except talking to this guy who was love bombing me and is avoidant. But everything else is, oh my god, Emma. That's crazy. Okay. Shield fossil. We'll put that kid in there. We'll put this wooden fencing in here for now. Right. I want to work on our orchard, and then maybe we'll go to one of these like dream islands and see if we can get anything good. Apparently we already have a Ditto doll, so I'll just put that in the box. Thanks, Dino. I had full faith you would recognize it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. You know, we have that table. Okay, I have an idea. We're gonna take 10 of these wooden log things. Okay. I'm gonna take this to Scyther so he can make us lumber. Also, welcome in everyone. Hope you guys are having a great day/night. Okay. Oof, I don't think Scyther is out, so I need to pick up some honey. Oh, what's happening over here? Anything? No. Oh, thanks for the follow, Alex. Appreciate it.